Welcome to the 8th webinar in the NatRoad Back to Basics series on awards and national employment standards. My name is Michelle and I'm pleased to introduce our speaker, Kylie James. Kylie is a Human Resources and Industrial Relations Specialist and advisor to NatRoad Members. Kylie will talk about public holidays. Over to you, Kylie.
Thanks, Michelle. And yes, we're going to talk about public holiday entitlements today under that are required under the National Employment Standards. Before I do start, I did want to acknowledge firstly the material where I've sourced the information that we've got in this presentation, and they've come from three different sources. Firstly, our own website, the members resources section. There's a lot of fact sheets and information in that particular resource that you can go to just about your business and look for some questions or information that you need around industrial relations or other topics. Secondly, the Fair Work Ombudsman website, and the Fair Work Ombudsman website gives us lots of different information just around the industrial relations system in Australia. And finally, the questions from our members. So we take lots of questions from our members. And so what we've done is try to include them in this presentation where possible. But if there is any other questions that you do have, please feel free to call up at any time. But hopefully the questions that or the information that we're offering today will help you with the questions that you have for your business. So we're going to cover off today what are public holidays, the minimum entitlements, substituting public holidays, and also where employees can reasonably refuse or potentially to request to work on a public holiday. So first of all, what is a public holiday? Well, a public holiday is a holiday generally established by law, and it's usually a non-working day, and that's paid generally for full-time and part-time employees. Public holidays in Australia are determined by a combination of a couple of things. Firstly, the statutes with specific gazetting of public holidays, and that's generally through the state and territory legislation, and also industrial awards and agreements. So we have quite a few national public holidays that are recognised. These include New Year's Day, Australia Day, Good Friday, Easter Monday, Anzac Day, Christmas Day, and Boxing Day. There are other public holidays such as the King's Birthday and Labor Day, but they're generally individually declared and gazetted by state and territory governments. And then we also have some specific public holidays to states and territories, such as Melbourne Cup or Canberra Day. So traditionally, employees have the right to take a public holiday off with regular pay. However, more and more recently, that's changed. And this is where a lot of businesses are now opening on public holidays. So this is where a business may request for an employee to work on that particular day. So what are the minimum entitlements around public holidays? Under the National Employment Standards, all employees are entitled to be absent from work on a day or a part day that is a public holiday. Now, the entitlements are different for full-time and part-time employees versus casual employees. So generally for a full-time and part-time employee who would have worked their ordinary hours on a day a public holiday falls, will be paid their base rate of pay for the ordinary hours that they would have worked if they had not been away on that particular public holiday. So an employee's base rate of pay does not include any incentive-based payments, bonuses, loadings, monetary allowances, overtime, or penalty rates. The difference with casual employees is they actually don't get paid for public holidays that they don't work. So with substituting for public holidays, if under a law or a state or territory, a day or a part day is substituted for any of these days or part days, then the substituted day or part day is the public holiday. So many awards do contain provisions whereby an employer and employee can decide to substitute one public holiday for another day. So that can be done between a conversation between the employee and the employer. So as I mentioned earlier, there are times where an employer or an employee can request to work on a public holiday, and an employee can also refuse to work on a public holiday. The employer can also refuse for the employee to work on a public holiday as well. But generally speaking, the National Employment Standards provides that an employee can refuse to work on a public holiday if the request from an employer is not reasonable, or the refusal by the employee is reasonable. So when looking at what is reasonable, there's a few things to take into account. The nature of your workplace, including the operational requirements and the nature of the work performed by the employee's personal circumstances, including family responsibilities, whether the employee could reasonably expect that you might request them to work on the public holiday, whether the employee is entitled to receive overtime payments, penalty rates, additional remuneration, or other compensation that reflects an expectation of work on the public holiday, the type of employment, so that means whether they're full-time, part-time, casual, or even potentially a shift worker, the amount of notice in advance of the public holiday given to the employer when making the request, the amount of notice in advance of the public holiday given by the employee in refusing the request. And there's a number of other different matters that might come into play depending on the particular situation. So there's some specific provisions under the Road Transport Long Distance Operations Award of 2020 that covers off public holidays. They're a little bit different to those in the other awards, so I wanted to talk through them now. And this is in relation to Clause 25 of the award. So for full-time and part-time employees under that particular award, if they're absent from work because it's a public holiday, they must be paid 20% of the minimum weekly rate specified at its Clause 16.1a, which is the minimum rates of pay. A full-time or part-time employee who is performing work on a public holiday is to be paid as the following. So if they're working on Good Friday or the Christmas Day public holiday, they get 30% of the minimum weekly wage, which is specified at Clause 16.1a, plus the appropriate payment for any work performed on the public holiday in accordance with the agreed method of payment. So that depends whether you're paying them per kilometre or per hour. For all other public holidays, they receive 20% of the minimum weekly wage, which is specified at Clause 16.1a, plus the appropriate payment of any work performed on the public holiday in accordance with the agreed method of payment. Again, whether you're paying them by the kilometre or the hourly rate. So for a full-time or part-time employee, if they're working on a public holiday, they must be paid for a minimum of 4 hours of work, whether they've actually worked those 4 hours or a shorter period. And obviously, if they've worked longer, you pay them for the time that they've actually worked. The casual employees under this award that are working on a public holiday, how they're paid is if they're working on Good Friday or the Christmas Day holiday, they receive 30% of the minimum weekly rate specified at Clause 16.1a, which again is the minimum rate to pay, plus the appropriate payment for any work performed on the public holiday in accordance with the agreed method of payment, i.e. paying them by kilometre or paying them for the hour. For all other public holidays, they receive 20% of the minimum weekly rate specified at Clause 16.1a, the minimum rate to pay, plus the appropriate payment for any work performed on the public holiday in accordance with the agreed method of payment. So whether you're paying them by the kilometre or the hourly rate. A casual employee will only be entitled to a payment which we just talked about above, where the majority of the work is undertaken on a particular journey, is undertaken on a public holiday. A casual employee working on a public holiday must be paid as follows. So if they're paid by the cents per kilometre, a minimum payment as for the 500 kilometres. And if they're paid by the hourly rate, it's a minimum payment of 8 hours work, whether they worked for the 8 hours or for a shorter period. The public holidays under the Transport and Distribution Award are slightly different to what we just went through with the Long Distance Award. So we'll go through those now. So they're generally reflected back towards the National Employment Standards. So for a full-time or a part-time worker, and this does not include shift workers, a full-time or part-time employee who is absent from work on a public holiday is to be paid their base rate of pay for the ordinary hours they would have worked if they had not been away because of the public holiday. A full-time or a part-time employee who works on a public holiday must be paid for the following rates. So for Good Friday and for Christmas Day, they receive 200% of the ordinary hourly rate. And for all other public holidays, it's 150% of the ordinary hourly rate. A full-time or part-time employee working on a public holiday must be paid for a minimum of 4 hours work, whether they worked for those 4 hours or a shorter period. And as mentioned before, if they work longer than the 4 hours, you must pay them for those hours. Payment for work on a public holiday is in addition to any amount payable in respect of the weekly rate. So for any avoidance of doubt, an employee who doesn't get paid for a public holiday if they don't normally work their ordinary hours on the day that the public holiday falls. So for casual employees under the Transport and Distribution Award, a casual employee who is performing work on a public holiday is to be paid in addition to the casual loading. So they get their casual loading that they usually would under the award, and then they get these rates on top of that. So for Good Friday and Christmas Day, it's 300% of the ordinary hourly rate. And for other public holidays, it's 250% of the ordinary hourly rate. So a casual employee working on a public holiday must be paid for a minimum of 4 hours work, whether they worked for those 4 hours or a shorter period. And again, if they're working more, they must be paid for those hours. And finally, the Clerks Private Sector Award, which is another common award that we use in our industry. For full-time and part-time employees who are absent from work on a public holiday, they must be paid their base rate of pay for the ordinary hours they would have worked if they had not been away because of the public holiday. So if they're working on that public holiday, or even a substituted public holiday, for all public holidays, they get double time and a half, which is 250%. But if both the public holiday and the substituted day that they work, the penalty rates are only payable on one of those days at the election of the employee. So they don't get to double dip, essentially. For casual employees under that award, a casual employee who's performing work on a public holiday is to be paid at the rate of time and a half, which is 150%, in addition to the casual loading. So again, for casual workers, they must be paid for a minimum of 4 hours work, whether they work those 4 hours or a shorter period. And if they work more, they get paid for those hours. So in summary, public holidays are different in each state and territory. So you need to understand where the employee works and what the employee is entitled to from that public holiday perspective in the state and territory that they're working in. The payments for for public holidays is different under each award. So we went through 3 different awards in today's presentation, and you can see it's all slightly different. So if you're not sure if you are covered by another award, or if your employee is covered by another award, please give us a call and we can help you understand and navigate what the public holiday provisions are for those particular awards. Payment is also different for full-time and part-time employees versus casual employees. Employers can ask for employees to work on a public holiday, but they also may reasonably refuse to work on a public holiday. And that's the end of our presentation today. I'll hand you back to Michelle. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Kylie. And remember, if you are a NatRoad member and you need any further advice, you can call NatRoad on 1-800-272-144, or you can email membership@natroad.com.au. Thank you to Prime Creative for sponsoring this webinar.